Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. This time of year, hope springs eternal in the minds of gardeners with dreams of a bountiful spring, summer, and fall. A garden filled with beautiful flowers, delicious fruits, wonderful vegetables. But for many second-year gardeners, as well as many more experienced gardeners, there could be a sophomore slump. So why does a so-so garden year sometimes follow a wildly successful garden year? Debbie Flower, our favorite retired college horticulture professor, holds our collective hands and offers tips for thwarting the gardener's sophomore slump. Also, Phil Pursel of Dave Wilson Nursery has advice on how you can be harvesting fresh fruit from May or June all the way through November and, for some, into December. Plus, the University of California Davis Arboretum Superintendent Emeritus, Warren Roberts, waxes rhapsodic about the plant of the week, the barberry. And finally, Debbie Flower offers some words of reassuring hope about your 2021 garden year. It's episode 72 of the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, and we'll do it all in under 30 minutes. Let's go. If you just started gardening last year, you may have had what we call beginner's luck in gardening. And I think it happens to everybody. Anybody who ever starts a garden, they are amazed at the results come the end of summer. And they think they can do it again. But generally speaking, there's always a hitch in that giddy-up for year number 2 in the garden. Debbie Flower is here, our favorite retired college horticultural professor. And Debbie, how can we avoid the sophomore slump in the garden? And by the way, the sophomore slump affects every gardener just about every year.
Yes, it's always fun for me to start a garden in a new location of my existing landscape, or to move to a new house and start a garden there, because that's the freshman year of that garden, and it's always the best. And it's the best because it's soil that has not been harvested before. And when I say that, I mean tomatoes and peppers and melons and things weren't grown on them, and those nutrients that went into those fruits weren't taken away. So it maybe had grass on it or whatever. A lot of the nutrients are still in the soil, and that's what benefits us on the first year, is that there's nutrition in the soil, and the plants just do phenomenally well. But every year after that, then we have to rebuild that nutrition base and add things that the plants have taken away by growing in that location. And there are ways to do that. You could buy fertilizers. Typically, the one that is needed the most is nitrogen. Every rainstorm brings nitrogen to the soil from the sky. And so depending on how much rain you get more or less nitrogen that way. But plants take a lot away, and nitrogen travels with water and it becomes a gas. So it easily leaves the soil as well. So we need to add nitrogen. We can do that in the fertilizer form. We can do it by having a cover crop in the winter. We can add mulch, like leaves, compost, something like that, and let that break down into the soil. You can get chicken manure and steer manure and use those in the garden, but some sort of nitrogen has to be added back into the garden.
I think one mistake gardeners make is, if a little is okay, adding more is better. But when it comes to fertilizer, that's not necessarily the case.
No, I actually burned my corn one year. I was working at an ag experiment station. I already had my first degree in horticulture, and I had a garden, and I used ammonium sulfate to fertilize my corn, and I burned the leaves. I put it on the soil, but it burned the leaves. And I actually took a leaf in to one of the professors at the experiment station. That's what he told me. I'd used too much nitrogen. And nitrogen, if you put nitrogen fertilizer on your garden now and you're not growing anything, that's a waste of it. It will wash away with the rain. It will become a gas and volatilize and disappear that way. You have to put nitrogen fertilizer on when the plants are present. So right now, other things are needed, and they are more gentle sources of nitrogen, like compost and leaves from the garden that you can let rot in place.
And a real popular one these days is worm castings.
Yes. The other is some people, and I've seen pictures of this, I had a student telling me about this, do their kitchen composting right in the middle of their vegetable bed because that attracts worms. Worms eat the kitchen waste, and you make your own worm castings that way.
I think the downside to that might be it will also attract skunks and possums and raccoons and other four-legged critters that might decide to also be munching on whatever you're growing.
Yes, it has to be done to prevent them from getting in. There are ways to do that.
And for a lot of people eager to garden, to put in garden year 2, they may say, okay, we started last year in May. This year, let's start in March. And planting too early is usually a death knell for plants.
Yes, if it's not warm enough, they're not going to grow. They're going to sit and wait and sulk in some cases. Some plants will just rot, and other plants will just sit and wait. Tomatoes put in too early, if it's too cold, will just turn sort of red and sit around. And then when it gets warm enough, they will take off. But other plants, seeds in particular, will just rot in place.
And we're not just talking about air temperature, it's also soil temperature.
Soil temperature is huge. That's more important than air temperature, yes.
And you'd be amazed at how high soil temperature is for plants like tomatoes and peppers and zucchini to take off and start flourishing. Soil temperatures need to be in the 70s, and usually in spring, even into mid-spring, soil temperatures are still in the 50s.
Especially if you've done the mulching. That's trapped the moisture, and moisture takes a lot more heat, a lot more energy, heat energy from the sun to warm the moist soil than to warm dry soil. So if you have mulch on top of soil, you've got lots of moisture there, then the soil takes a very long time to warm up.
The other problem that gardeners may face on a year-to-year basis is, boy, these plants just aren't growing the way they used to. Well, what's different about the area? Did those trees you plant get a little bigger and they're now blocking the sun? Sun versus shade, big issue when it comes for vegetable growing.
Yes, it is. Vegetables need a good 8 hours of full sun to produce their fruit. If you're getting shade a little sooner, then you're not going to get the same output.
And maybe you're thrifty, shall we say, and you like to use old seed. Well, old seeds can germinate, but they may not grow very quickly or very healthy.
Or you may get nothing. They may not germinate.
Right.
I found when I was teaching, it wasn't worth reusing seed because I wanted students to have a positive experience, and old seed didn't always provide that. It didn't germinate.
Yeah, and I've experimented this year with seeds that are 2 years old in the case of snapdragon seeds, and it took them weeks, almost a couple of months for them to germinate, and they're growing so slowly that, well, really, I should have just used fresh seed.
Yes, maybe they got into a heavy dormancy.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah,
sure.
we can come up with all sorts of good excuses, but basically lack of soil nitrogen, planting too early in the year, planting in too much shade, planting from old seed, or thinking that seed you saved from last year's tomatoes are going to produce the same thing as last year. The dreams, but no, the nightmares.
Yes. And we have to preserve. The other is once you've created a garden, let's say you did it this past summer, then we have to preserve that soil. We don't want to walk on it when it's wet. We don't want to really walk on it at all. We want some designated paths so that we don't compact the soil. Especially don't want to walk on it when it's wet because that will compact it even more. And we want to keep it covered, which protects it from rain. Rain can actually cause soil to compact. And so keeping it covered with your leaves from other parts of the garden is a great idea. Or if you had a Christmas tree, you can cut all the branches off and lay them on the garden, something like that. But keeping the soil covered so that when it rains, it doesn't further compact that soil. Compacted soil is hard to garden in.
We've said it on this program many times. You're not feeding plants, you're feeding soil. And this time of the year is the time of the year to feed your soil by doing what Debbie's talking about, putting down compost, putting down mulch, putting down anything to help feed the soil.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's our job for the winter.
And don't walk on it because it's probably wet.
Yes.
Also, winter is a good time to notice the low spots of your garden and perhaps avoid planting there. After a rainstorm, a good rainstorm, go outside after 12 hours, 24 hours, and note the low spots where there's still standing water or it's really squishy. put a big stick there to remind you where that spot is. And you may want to avoid planting your annual vegetable garden in that location or building that area up to a raised bed to improve the drainage, because poor drainage is also bad news for plants.
Yes, it is. Causes those roots to rot, and that's a problem.
Anything else for Sophomore Slump?
Nope, that's all I've got.
That's all I got, too. I'm sure I'll think of something later. Yep, another successful garden awaits you if you just follow a few simple steps. Debbie Flower, thanks for some great advice.
Always a pleasure, Fred. Thank you so much.
Oh, I knew I would think of something else. Besides not walking on your soil, try to fight the urge to rototill your soil. In agriculture, more and more farmers are seeing the benefits of no-till cover crop soil. It builds up the soil biology, and the cover crops allow roots to develop that can actually improve the drainage of your soil and provide more oxygen for the worms that live down there, as well as new plant roots. But don't take it from me, take it from soil podologist Steve Zion, who told us back in episode 45 about the benefits of feeding your soil and not chopping it up with a rototiller.
And one of the things that you have to realize is that the soil biology eat the most of is organic matter. And so you need to put in organic matter, and you do that not by tilling the soil. Tilling the soil destroys the soil structure and actually ends up compacting the soil and kills the soil biology. So you just want to put these things on the soil surface. The best two things that you can put down are worm castings. Those are my favorite, especially if you've got clay soils, because they contain a lot of different kinds of soil biology. And composting. Just put it on top of the soil. The rains and the irrigation will work that organic matter into the soil. Also, by putting that organic matter on the soil surface, worms will come up every single night and feed on that material and go back down in the morning. And they'll act as Mother Nature's rototillers. And so they're going to, that organic material, the compost and the worm castings will eventually disappear because it's going to be going into the soil, feeding the soil biology. And when you see that gone, time to add more.
By rototilling, you're not really blending in other soils. You're destroying a lot of microbiology that took a long time to develop. Plus, you're chopping up earthworms. So fight the urge to buy that rototiller. Instead, invest your money in something useful like a chipper shredder, where you can take all those downed tree branches, chop them up, and it makes a great mulch. Here on the Garden Basics Podcast, we like to talk with Warren Roberts, the Superintendent Emeritus of the UC Davis Arboretum, about plants that have a wide appeal throughout much of the United States. We call it the Plant of the Week segment. And Warren, another plant that puts on a show in January is barberry, also known as berberis.
Yes, and particularly Berberis thunbergi, which is native to Japan and China. Thunbergi, in German that would be Thunbergi, or Thunbergi, I guess. And then the form Atropurpurea, which typically has purplish leaves. There is one cultivar called Concord, Concord, that has dependably produces the little red berries. These are cylindrical, very small, but bright red. And when the leaves fall from the plant, these berries stay on for quite a long time, almost look as if they're unconnected to anything. The brightness of the berry and the dark stems of the shrub make a very special effect that I can't really think of anything else that does that. So I think it's a very useful shrub, and I love the berries. They're bright, glossy red.
We should warn people, though, that there are spines on the barberry, so be careful around it.
Yes, many barberries, the genus, it's a big genus, goodness, I forget how many species, but Berberis thunbergi has spines on the stems, but they're not very stickery. They're the kind that if you try to push your way through, it'll let you know it, but they're not going to send you to the hospital, really. The plant, when it's deciduous, almost disappears. It's like a little dark cloud. And that's why these varieties that have the red berries, I think, are very important. When the leaves of this Atropurpurea form, which is a dark-leafed form, purple, a dark purple, a maroon purple, really, when the leaves turn, they actually turn red again and then fall. So it's a successful plant in the garden. And if you don't mind the fact that it loses its leaves in the winter, then you're good to go.
And it's a very hardy plant. It's hardy down to 20 below zero, and I guess it gets about 4 to 6 feet tall?
I think that, yes, it can get, the species itself can get rather tall. This cultivar that I mentioned only gets 18 inches tall.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of nice. Oh, the flowers. The flowers are small. They're kind of yellowish with a little bit of red blush, but you have to get really close to see them. Mainly you grow them for the foliage, this particular one for the berries. And there's a bit of a barrier because it'll remind you to stay on the path if you get too close.
Yes, it is described in this book I'm reading as a barrier plant.
Yeah, a berry barrier, I suppose.
There you go.
Anyway, incidentally, it's in the same botanical family as Nandina.
Which we talked about last week.
Yeah.
The barberry we've been talking about is the Japanese barberry, and the Atropurpurea is also commonly known as the red leaf Japanese barberry. Find it at a nursery near you. It puts on a great show this time of year. Check it out. Barberry. Warren Roberts, Superintendent Emeritus of the UC Davis Arboretum. You can find out more about the Arboretum by visiting their website, arboretum.ucdavis.edu. Warren, thanks for your help on the Plant of the Week.
You're welcome, Fred.
We're talking with Phil Pursel from Dave Wilson Nursery, getting some good ideas about what to plant in the way of fruit and berry varieties that are hitting nursery shelves now here in California. They'll be arriving throughout the United States in the weeks and months ahead of late winter. And Phil, I think when it comes to growing in your backyard, I think the key is to have a lot of different varieties that all ripen at different times so that you can be harvesting fruit from your backyard from spring through late fall.
Absolutely. Probably the number one mistake that homeowners make when they decide, okay, I'm going to go ahead and plant some fruit trees, is not doing just a little bit of research on when they're going to get the fruit. So, they might walk into a retail garden center and just be overwhelmed with all the different varieties. So just a little bit of homework, they can have fruit through the whole summer. The biggest mistake is picking, let's say they want to get 3 peach trees. So, they just pick 3 peach trees. And to find out that 2 of the varieties will produce in June and the other one will produce in September, well, then they have nothing for July and August. So kind of understanding how to plan a backyard orchard is key to really enjoying fruit throughout the whole season.
Okay, so let's talk about various fruit trees and berry varieties that would say ripen in late spring and then early summer, then late summer, and then fall. And so take us through. So for late spring, we might be talking May and June. I know here in California, you can get cherries and blueberries pretty easy in May.
That's it. So late spring, it's cherry and blueberry season. That's kind of like the heart of, cherries are always the first out on the market, and there are new low chill cherries that are super early. When we're talking, the Zagers now have varieties that end of April are producing fruit. But think of, May really as cherry season and the beginning of blueberry season. But you'll also start seeing some real early varieties of peaches. So someone who is just a peach lover might want to get like an early treat variety, understanding that early peaches aren't going to have the sugar content that later peaches have. So you kind of think of, late spring as that's cherry and blueberry season.
Yeah, I don't say I look askance, but I have to wonder about really early maturing varieties and really late maturing varieties of different fruit whose real season is the heart of summer. But it's worth a try, and you might like it. I'm thinking of the Fairtime peach, which here ripens in mid to late September. And Fairtime gets sort of a so-so rating, but I've always enjoyed the taste of Fairtime.
Exactly. So Fairtime has been considered kind of the late season peach. But a few years ago, we introduced the Oktoberfest. And the Oktoberfest is a late September into mid-October peach that never caught on with the commercial, the farmer. Reason being is they were done with peaches. So the Zegers developed this one peach that we named the Oktoberfest. It's a fantastic peach. Someone who really, really loves peaches can have this variety into October. This might be the same person that might have the early treat that has May peaches. So now, they're covering the whole spectrum.
Now, what about apples? People love apples, and they like to, yank an apple off a tree and have that. It's a crispy, sweet, or a tart taste treat, depending upon your taste buds. What's a good early season and mid-season and late season apple varieties to choose?
Early season, kind of the traditionals are the Gravenstein varieties. Honeycrisp is actually considered a fairly early season. We have this one variety that we call the Ghost apple. It's a 4th of July apple. It's a nearly white, very light blushed apple that is fantastic. Mid-season, that's kind of like your Golden Delicious, your Jonagolds, and then there's a whole host of kind of heirloom apples that fall into the mid-season. And mid-season is kind of like in that September category. Fuji would kind of be towards the end of the mid-season. And then you come down with the late season varieties. And the ones that people are most familiar with would be the Yellow Newtown Pippin, Granny Smith, Pink Lady. The one thing about Granny Smith, and they're too tart. And you get them in the grocery store, they're too tart. Well, that's because they're picked too early. In fact, when off our trees here at the nursery, we start picking the Granny Smiths off the trees end of November, beginning of December. When they start turning almost like a Golden Delicious color, the tartness is gone, and you get that fantastic Granny Smith flavor that people really like. But people shy away from Granny Smiths because the commercial growers, they just pick them early, and they're set bright green. Really, they should be a lighter green, almost yellow color. They're still super crisp, juicy, but they don't have the tartness that you're kind of familiar with in the grocery store.
Exactly, and that's why I always advise people to not judge the quality of a piece of fruit based on what you buy at a grocery store. Judge it by what you're picking in somebody's backyard, because that'll give you a true indication of when it's really ripe. And that's great information about the Granny Smith, which is naturally a green apple. But if you just let it sit on the tree, maybe through a frost or two, and it turns kind of yellow, that's when it's sweet.
A lot of varieties that you see in the grocery store is based on when the commercial grower wants to harvest it. They need to end their season at a certain time. They pick these later varieties earlier than they should be, and they just don't reach the matureness that they need to, and they start getting bad names to them.
But again, judge it by what you pluck off the tree, not what you're taking out of
Absolutely.
a box at a grocery store.
And that's what you can do when you grow it at home. You're able to decide when it's ready to harvest.
A good intermediary, though, would be purchasing it at a farmer's market, because chances are those were picked in the last 24 to 48 hours.
Correct. So the farmer's market is where you're going to get the closest to a homegrown fruit. It's a much smaller operation, and they're definitely able to react faster when the fruit is nearly perfect. Whereas some of these larger growers, it's about efficiencies and getting the fruit off of the tree. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's just a different way of growing fruit. So if you want to get the the best flavor, it's going to come from your farmer's market or definitely from your own backyard.
If you want a good encyclopedia of growing fruit trees, I would direct you to davewilson.com, their website. Not only is there a lot of written information there, but their series of videos, they call them the Fruit Tube videos, can take you from planting to harvest and caring for the tree throughout the growing season. It's also available on YouTube as well, but visit davewilson.com for a whole host of very good, accurate information about growing fruit, vines, and nuts, no matter where you live, wherever Dave Wilson product can be found, which is most of the United States. Phil Pursel, we learned a lot today. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, as we approach another outdoor garden season for most of the United States in the months ahead, the dreams are wonderful. We have a lot of hope about what our future garden will look like. Every year, I don't care if you're a new gardener or an experienced gardener, you've got hope about what your garden this year is going to do, how it's going to produce, how it's going to be better than last year. Debbie, it takes a lot of hope to be a gardener.
It sure does. I sometimes think that's what keeps me getting up out of bed every day, because gardening is about hope, and it's about optimism, and it's about belief in the future. You have to believe that with the gardener's touch, the tiny seed becomes a fully grown plant bearing flowers and fruit and lavish leaves. And the baby sapling will become a big tree, providing shade and nesting space and a strong limb to support a swing. And there's hope that where the gardener toils, beauty and human nourishment and habitat for nature flourish. Gardening is the triumph of hope over experience. There are no mistakes in gardening, only experiments from which the gardener learns and grows and hopes and believes that with the next garden, something beautiful and delicious will happen.
It's sort of like the optimism of parents that each successive child will be better than the one that came before.
Yes.
Good luck.
Yes. I have to say that I was doing some reading about gardening and hope, and some of what I said was inspired by quotes from Elizabeth Murray, Julie Levine, Janet Kilburn Phillips, and Audrey Hepburn.
Oh. Well, the beauty of plants, as we know, unlike children, plants don't talk back at you.
I know. Isn't that wonderful? And you can just dig them up and throw them out if they're a problem.
There we go. All right. Let's embark on another season of gardening, Debbie.
Oh, I love it. Yes, let's do that.
The Garden Basics podcast is going to a winter schedule, maybe just like your favorite local nursery. November through January, Garden Basics will come out once a week on Fridays. Then, as the weather warms back up in February, we'll return to our twice-a-week schedule. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and leaving comments. We appreciate that you've included us in your garden life.